Welcome back, everybody, to the Kota Cappers College Computer Show, hosted by myself, Kota Capper Pace, on the Kota Sports Gambling Network. And, of course, Dan, the Computer Man, Dan Angel 11. You can find him on Twitter. Dan, episode 3, man. I can't believe we talked about doing this, and now we're already 3 episodes in. So pretty cool. How are we doing today, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to hopefully a good week of college football. Hopefully we can get a little more consistency out of these plays. And somewhat really well. I think 4 different conferences on the computer hit every game straight up. So just need to do a little better on those spreads.
Yeah, for sure. I'm looking at the Big Ten here. 1-6 last week, Dan, against the spread.
Yeah, that one was rough.
And let's see, what else do we have here? You mentioned a couple of them. Pac-12 went 5-1. So kind of anything else stand out to you, Dan, from last week 5 rankings there?
Washington State proved to be a pretty solid play for me, taking down Cal and doing it pretty easily. That made me look good for my lock of the week. And then Kansas, the computer just does not want to believe in the Jayhawks, which, I watched that game with Iowa State, and Iowa State absolutely blew that game. So I can totally understand the computer's hesitation there on Kansas. So we'll see. If they can pull it off this week, then that'll definitely make the computer take notice.
So, Dan, are you a believer in Kansas? Because Matt Campbell should have never sent the field goal kicker out to kick that. That was dumb. But do you believe in Kansas, Dan, or where are you at on that?
I believe Kansas is a much better team than last year, and I think they certainly have the program going in the right direction. But Iowa State, 1 for 4 on the field goals. Like, you hit 2 of those, and the Cyclones win the game. So, and on top of that, Kansas only really had 1 good drive in that game. So, I don't know. Looking at the numbers, the Jayhawks might very well be underdogs in every game they have left on the schedule. And truth be told, nobody at Kansas will ever say this publicly, but I think if you hooked up the Jayhawks administration to a lie detector and asked them if they would be just fine if Kansas went into a bit of a tailspin, finished 7-5, and still made a bowl game, I think they'd be thrilled with that, because that might cool off Wisconsin and Nebraska's interest in Lance Leipold, because they're going in the right direction, but if somebody poaches him, then it could all fall apart really quick.
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm going to probably get the year wrong, Dan, but Kansas, 2012 started 5-0 and then lost the last 7 games in a row. So you're hoping for one of those years, huh?
You hope to at least get to a bowl game. Getting to a bowl would be huge, but I think, a 7-5 year from 5-0. I think privately, obviously they'll never say it publicly, but I think privately the AD's office would be absolutely fine with that.
Yeah, I agree. Should be interesting. I was kind of stunned, Wisconsin. I know we'll get into the computer rankings here, but Wisconsin firing their coach. Dan, thoughts on that? A little early. Thoughts on that?
A lot early.
Yeah.
I just don't know. We're in the era where basically anything is seen as either you get it done now or here's the door. What Paul Chryst had done there, you look at these numbers, he had no losing seasons. His worst season there was 8-5. And 2019, Wisconsin was in the Rose Bowl. The expectations in Madison are just crazy to fire him this early. Now, I get that Illinois should not be coming into Madison and winning that game by that kind of margin, nor should they hold Wisconsin to 2 rushing yards, but that's not worth a firing. I think Wisconsin panicked because they don't want to lose Jim Leonard, but if he's that good, then make him the coach in waiting, and just pay him a boatload of money like all these places did with Brent Venables, who is not exactly getting the job done at Oklahoma right now.
Oof, they looked rough.
They did.
They indeed looked rough. So, Dan, all right. I love chatting football with you. I could do it all day. You have great insight. But week 6 is here. Computer plays, power conferences that start here in the ACC. Last week, 3-3 straight up, 4-2 against the spread. Let's start here. Pittsburgh. They're minus 14.5 against Virginia Tech, and the computer has them by 19 points over the Hokies. Thoughts on this one?
Yeah, Virginia Tech just looks so bad this year. I mean, my sister is a VT grad. I've talked with her a little bit about Virginia Tech during the West Virginia game, and she's even said, yeah, we're just a sad football team this year. I mean, this team is not going anywhere. It's going to be a long, painful year in Blacksburg. And Pitt is known for these kind of head scratchers under Pat Narduzzi. So I think they bounce back nicely. They're at home, and I think they should handle Virginia Tech pretty easily here.
Duke minus 3.5. I like Duke here, Dan. This week I took them over Georgia Tech. Obviously, Georgia Tech got that win last week, fired their coach. A little resurgence there, but the computer has Duke by 7 over Georgia Tech. Thoughts on this one?
Yeah, this really isn't a game that gets a lot of attention, but I mean, Duke Georgia Tech has actually been a pretty decent rivalry over the years because these are both academic type schools in the ACC. I mean, Duke obviously, Georgia Tech less obvious, but if you know about the school, you know it's a highly academic institution. And Duke has actually played pretty well in this series. I believe Duke has won 5 of the past 8 meetings with Tech, and Duke looked really good against Virginia. I think that win over Pittsburgh was just kind of Georgia Tech's last gasp. I think the Blue Devils will keep up the momentum that they got in whacking Virginia. And on top of that, Duke really has to figure out where they're going to find those 2 wins to get to a bowl game. And they've got 3 good chances: Virginia Tech, Boston College, Georgia Tech. And of those, only Virginia Tech is at home. So they've got to get one of these road wins. And this is the one, I think.
Love it. Awesome. NC State minus 3. A lot of people are going to be tuned in for this one against Florida State. NC State, the computer has them by 6 over the Seminoles. Thoughts on this one?
Yeah. The computer really does not like it when it gets proven wrong about a team. And Florida State, it had them beating Wake Forest, and the Seminoles didn't do the job. I mean, NC State, the defense is for real. So I don't know. I think the Wolfpack should be able to get it done here, and they have no margin for error left now. I mean, after losing that game to Clemson, they basically have to run the table and hope to get some help to be able to make it to the ACC title game.
The computer loves the Tar Heels, Dan, this week. They're plus 3.5. The computer has them by over 6 against Miami here. Thoughts on this one?
I think it's more that the computer hates Miami.
There we go. Okay. All right.
Because the computer is thinking one thing when it comes to the Hurricanes: Middle Tennessee.
Yep.
And I think this could be one where Miami's getting a little bit underrated because of that nightmarish game. And on top of that, Middle Tennessee was also a little bit underrated because of just how badly James Madison smacked them on the first week. And the computer had no idea what to make of James Madison because James Madison was coming up from FCS. I haven't been rating FCS teams before this season. So the computer had no real data on the Dukes, and they come in and blast Middle Tennessee. So the computer's reaction was, okay, Middle Tennessee sucks.
Yep.
Well, that might not be the case. So this line might be a little bit off, but North Carolina plus the 3.5, I think that actually looks like a pretty solid play there. I don't know if I'd take them to win, but I like going getting the points there.
Yeah, love it. All right, Big 12 last week, 2-3 straight up, 3-2 against the spread. A lot of big games here. All these games, Dan, all these teams are ranked. At least one of these teams in all these 4 games are ranked, except the Texas and Oklahoma games. So that's kind of interesting too. We can start right there. Texas minus 9.5, but the computer has a close game by them over 8 over Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, every year it seems like this is the game where Oklahoma gets it figured out, becomes Oklahoma again. And this is one where there is no home field advantage because the game's in Dallas, so there's no adjustment to the ratings. And I just don't know what to make of Texas. I mean, the computer did nail that pick against West Virginia last week. Texas actually beat the expectation by a couple points, but Texas also failed to get the job done when they played against Texas Tech. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with a 50-50 split crowd against an opponent who has just tortured them for so many years. So, and Oklahoma should come out fired up after getting embarrassed last week.
Yeah, is Gabriel? Is he? I don't think he's playing Saturday. I haven't seen that. I know he got banged up a little
Don't
bit, but
believe he is. I mean, if I remember right, he took a pretty
yeah,
pretty
nasty.
shot. So yeah, I don't think that he's going to play. So that could be an instance where this line is totally off because the computer cannot adjust for injuries. So.
Yep, that makes sense. So, of course, got to touch on this one. TCU -7. The computer likes them by 9 points or more over Kansas here.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what to make here because TCU might be getting a little bit overinflated because of just how badly they beat Oklahoma after Gabriel came out. And the computer still isn't completely sold on Kansas, as we talked about. So I don't know. I mean, I think this is probably a game that I'm going to stay away from, but we'll see.
Kansas State, love them, love Coach Kleiman, but they're going to a hostile environment here against Iowa State. Iowa State +2. Computer likes Iowa State by 4 over Kansas State.
Yeah, this is one where I'm going to disagree with the computer, which, given my track record when I do that, you should probably bet heavily on the Cyclones because it almost never works out for me when I go against the computer. But Kansas State is so opportunistic with the football. I mean, the Wildcats are +8 in turnover margin this year, and Iowa State has just given it away so many times the last 2 weeks, which is why they've given away on 2 very winnable games. I think the only game where the Cyclones really haven't been turning it over was, ironically enough, against Iowa. So I don't know. I think that Kansas State has the better team overall, and I just don't think Hunter Dekkers is there yet. I think he's going to get there over the next couple years, but right now, a freshman quarterback against a defense that creates a lot of turnovers, I think the Wildcats will get it done here.
Sounds good. The Big Ten last week, 4-3 straight up, 1-6, like we mentioned, against the spread. Can the Cornhuskers, Dan, get it done against Rutgers here this weekend?
Well, I mean, if you tune into our soccer podcast, we brought that up quite a few times during our random delve into college football. I like Rutgers' defense. I mean, Ohio State couldn't pass on Rutgers last week. The Buckeyes still put up 49 points because their running game is also excellent, and Rutgers just couldn't stop them for 4 quarters. But Rutgers' defense is actually pretty solid. And I think Nebraska having to go out to New Jersey on a Friday night, I don't think it's going to work for them. I think Rutgers has a good chance to cover and might win this outright.
Nebraska -3, like we said, the computer has them by 1 over Rutgers. So in a close game there. Wisconsin, obviously we just talked about the firing of their head coach. They're -9.5. Computer has them by 13 or more against Northwestern.
The computer is so low on Northwestern right now. I mean, Northwestern, the computer is so down on the Wildcats that when Northwestern got quote unquote upset by Miami of Ohio, their rating actually went up because they did better than the computer expected. The computer had the Red Hawks winning that game by 5, and they only won by 3. So a team that loses to the likes of Southern Illinois and Miami of Ohio, Pat Fitzgerald's an excellent coach, but I don't think he's working with enough talent this year, and Wisconsin can't be as bad as it showed against Illinois. So I think the Badgers will come in embarrassed and bounce back pretty nicely here.
Yeah, sounds good. Pac-12 last week, 6-0 straight up, 5-1. ATS, Utah, going to get challenged here, taking on UCLA. Utah -3.5, but the computer likes them big by 10 over the Bruins.
Yeah. So Utah has really put that game against Florida in the rearview mirror, and Utah never should have lost that game to Florida.
No.
The Utes were the better team. They just blew it on that final drive. And since then, they have really stepped it up. They look like a top 10 worthy team. UCLA played well against Washington, but didn't really step on the throat at the end, kind of allowed that game to be a little bit closer than it should have been. And I think Utah is going to take advantage of some of those mistakes, and maybe not by 10, but I think a touchdown is probably a good place to be here.
And I think the public too, Dan, kind of forgotten about the Utes a little bit too after that first game, So just kind of keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the reason they forgot was because Florida kind of went the opposite direction after that game and immediately losing to Kentucky. So the public basically just jumped off Utah's bandwagon, and quietly Utah's been getting things back together.
Yep, for sure. USC minus 12.5, but the computer expects a close game against Washington State, over 5 points here. What do you think?
Yeah,
What do you like
USC really hasn't put teams away as well as the computer thought it should. In USC, the games that they've played so far, Stanford middling at best, and USC allowed them to climb back into it somewhat in the fourth quarter. Oregon State gave USC a really tough fight, and Arizona State, not a very good team at all, but USC toyed with them a little bit, won the game comfortably, but not by as much as the computer was expecting. And that Fresno State game, I mean, Fresno State just lost to UConn, so the luster is off that one.
here?
Washington State's been playing very well every week. The Cougars really should be 5-0 if they hadn't melted down in the final few minutes against Oregon. And yeah, I think Washington State can hang around here and keep this one tight.
We'll head to the other Washington, coming off that loss to UCLA, minus 13.5, but computer likes a close one against Arizona State by 6 here. Dan, what do you like here?
Yeah, so Arizona State's kind of the opposite situation as USC. The Sun Devils, absolutely nobody thinks that this is a good team, but other than that Eastern Michigan disaster, Arizona State's been doing a little bit better than people expect each week. And it doesn't really show up in the win column because they're still getting routed. But playing at home against a Washington team that finally met some adversity, this isn't going to be an easy game by any means. And the Sun Devils definitely have the talent, if not the execution ability, to keep things close. So I don't know if it'll be quite as close as the computer thinks, but Arizona State in the points is pretty tempting here.
Yeah, for sure. Let's head over to the SEC last week, 5-0, straight up 2-3 against the spread. Tennessee, Dan, minus 3, but the computer likes them by just 1 point over LSU. And this is an LSU home game, correct?
This is an LSU home game, but it is also
a
noon LSU home game, so that does take away some of the advantage of
Yep.
Tiger Stadium. Tennessee, they meet expectations when they're playing weaker teams. They tend to fall short of expectations when they're playing SEC opponents. So I don't know. I mean, this number would have been higher if Tennessee had actually kept their foot on the gas against Florida instead of almost allowing the Gators to pull off a comeback. So LSU has played fairly well, but I think Tennessee is the better team here, and I think that they can handle business in this situation.
Sounds good. Missouri, another team that's looked pretty solid, Dan, as of late, taking on Florida. Florida minus 10.5. The Gators by 10. The computer likes them over Missouri.
Gators are by 5 over Missouri.
But excuse me. Yep, by 5. Yep. Good catch.
Yep. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, Missouri is getting a lot of credit for almost taking down Georgia last week, which, I mean, Georgia's been sleepwalking for the last couple weeks, and if the Bulldogs don't get their act together, then they're going to get picked off by somebody. I mean, this is going to be an interesting one because Florida and Missouri really don't like each other that much. Eli Drinkwitz memorably trolled Dan Mullen with his "May the Force be with you" after Dan Mullen's Darth Vader moment over the past 2 years. So
if you don't know what we're talking about, go look that up.
Yeah, I mean, it's subtle, but Drinkwitz just pulls out a lightsaber to end his conference, says "May the Force be with you," a year after the Darth Vader thing, which didn't even have anything to do with Missouri. So, yeah, I think the fact that Missouri did not win that game against Georgia should actually motivate the Tigers, and that might keep this game a little bit close. And I'm just not sold on Florida. And neither is the computer, apparently.
Yeah, for sure. Alabama minus 23.5, but the computer likes it by 30 at least against Texas A&M here, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, Texas A&M, so inconsistent and really just has not been getting it done against good teams. I mean, you lose by 18 to Mississippi State, you lose to Appalachian State, and no disrespect to either of those teams. Those are good football teams, but Alabama's on another level again. And I think Nick Saban has probably been waiting for this game quite a bit after the war of words between him and Jimbo Fisher. So if he's got a chance to kick Fisher while he's down, I think he's going to take it.
All right. Sounds good. That's head over to the non-Power 5 conferences here. We're talking Week 6 computer plays, obviously. And we got a great football number here. Cincinnati, Dan, minus 27.5. taking on South Florida. The computer likes Cincinnati by 37 over the Bulls here.
Yeah, I really feel so bad for my wife's alma mater because, I mean, really in pretty much all the time that we've been married, except for 1 year in there where South Florida was actually competent, they've just done nothing but get creamed. I mean, Cincinnati seems to have picked itself up nicely from that loss to Arkansas, which the Bearcats were very competitive in that game, and they've bounced back pretty well. They've looked good against some decent opponents. I mean, Tulsa's not a bad team. Cincinnati handled things pretty well there. Indiana, a middling Big Ten team, and Cincinnati blasted them pretty good. So, yeah, South Florida's really done nothing to suggest that they can even stay close. They're 1-4 against the spread anyway. So, yeah, I think Cincinnati rolls here.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a reason. Put simply, there's a reason that we live 2 hours away from Cincinnati, and we did not even consider going to this game.
I hear you. So there we go. All right, Conference USA last week, 2-3 straight up, 1-4 against the spread. You think Dan? Obviously, Dan writes his articles, his blogs every single week, and you think the computer's not giving UTSA enough respect? Is that correct?
Yeah, So I'm not sure if it's that UTSA is not getting enough respect, or if Western Kentucky's number is just too inflated because of the fact that Western Kentucky just annihilated a terrible Florida International team. I mean, there's only so much that the computer can do when looking at a 73-0 score. But UTSA has played very well this year, other than the Texas game. And they're coming off a 15-point win over the Middle Tennessee team that just handled Miami. So, yeah, I think the Roadrunners are a stronger team than they're getting credit for, and I don't think the Hilltoppers are quite as good as their number suggests.
Sounds good. UConn -5.5, but the computer likes them by over double digits against a team that just lost 73 rip here, Dan.
Yeah, so Florida International did bounce back by somehow beating New Mexico State after that, but UConn's coming off a surprising win over Fresno State, and Jim Mora actually has the Huskies turning into something not horrible. I mean, there's still a long way to go to rebuild this program, but the Huskies are actually fighting hard, and Florida International is a very beatable team. So, yeah, I think UConn can definitely take this one.
Yeah, I have that one circled. Need to do a little more research, but I kind of like UConn in that one, just looking at the numbers right off the bat. Independence, Dan, last week, 1-3 straight up, 1-3 against the spread. This is interesting right here. Notre Dame -3.5, but the computer likes them by 13 over BYU.
Yeah, so I think the computer is giving Notre Dame a lot of credit for what they did in North Carolina. That was a game where the Irish were pretty much in control from start to finish. And BYU is really getting punished for how it allowed Utah State to hang around with them, and Wyoming to a lesser extent. In Utah State, we know is not a good team, and yet BYU couldn't really put that much distance between themselves and the Aggies. So I think going out to wait, is this game in South Bend, or is this a neutral site? I need to double check that.
I think it's in South Bend, right?
All right, I'm double checking this because that would actually change the number slightly if it's not in South Bend. I think I might have read that it's a neutral site.
Is it? Okay, all right.
So let's see. Okay, it's in Las Vegas.
Ooh, okay.
So that's actually going to be Notre Dame by 10 over BYU, not 13. I need to update that.
Okay, sounds good.
But yeah, I still think Notre Dame is the stronger team, and yeah, I think they'll handle a BYU team that is just not really getting it done right now.
Yep, for sure. All right, let's head to the MAC last week, 4-2 straight up, 2-4 against the spread. Little flip flop there. Ohio -10, but you have the computer has them by 17 over Akron.
I mean, Akron has just been so poor for so long. Eventually, the Zips are going to get this figured out and start turning in the right direction, but it's hard to see it happening anytime soon. I mean, they're 1-4 this season, and Ohio has really looked fairly decent against MAC competition. I mean, they just took Kent State to overtime. They do have a win against a okay Sun Belt team in Florida Atlantic, and I just don't really like what Akron brings to the table. They did at least play well against Bowling Green, but I mean, they've been drilled by Tennessee, which no shame in that, but they also got drilled by Michigan State. So I'm just not buying Akron.
All right, there we go. Buffalo -2.5, Dan. Computer has them by 7 or more against Bowling Green here.
Yeah, so Bowling Green is kind of getting punished for almost losing to Akron. I mean, Akron's numbers are pretty much as bad. So if you even play a close game against the Zips, your number's going to drop pretty quickly. And Buffalo played pretty well in getting past Miami. They needed a late touchdown to do it, but they're off to a good start in the MAC this year, and they might be a surprise team out of the East.
Love it. Love it. Instead of the Mountain West here last week, 4-0 straight up, 1-3 against the spread. All right. Air Force -10.5, Dan, against Utah State, but the computer has them by 17 or more.
Yeah. Air Force kind of got hit a little bit because they played Navy and they didn't do all that well against Navy. They won the game, but it was only by 3 points. But I mean, they play Navy every season, obviously, and they run the same offense. So it's kind of hard to really create that much separation between the two of the 3 service academies there. Utah State has just looked bad all year. I mean, They have had one moment of competence when they played BYU, but they come in ranked 108th against the run, and they're facing the number 1 rushing team in the nation. So not really a good combination.
There we go. San Jose State. This is an interesting game too. San Jose State, 3-1, UNLV 4-1, San Jose State -6.5, but the computer has them by over 19 against UNLV.
Yeah, so I think San Jose State has just played better competition. I mean, they gave Auburn a tight game. They crushed Western Michigan, and Western Michigan actually looks like a pretty solid contender in the MAC West. So UNLV has just beaten a bunch of bad teams this season. Yeah, they're 4-1, but who's their best win of the season? So far, they've beaten New Mexico, Utah State, North Texas, and Idaho State. I mean, there's not really a good team on that list at all. And their one loss was to Cal, who is a middling Pac-12 team. So I'm just not sold on UNLV. I think once they start playing better competition, they're going to come back to earth.
Yep, for sure. Boise State -7.5. I got a -7. It's my lock of the week, but the computer likes them just by 6 over Fresno State here, Dan.
Yeah, so the computer is still not sure what to make of Boise State because the Broncos have been as strong as usual on the blue, but they've been pretty poor once they get away from the Treasure Valley. So I think that this is one where I'd probably tease Boise down just to be safe, but yeah, there's no way that I'm going against Boise State playing at Bronco Stadium. So if I have to eat the 7, that'd be what I do here.
Man, they look good in that second half too against SDSU. Real good there in that second half. Sunbelt last week, 5-0 straight up. Love to see that. 3-2 against the spread. You made some money there too. Troy -6.5, but the computer has them by over 18 against Southern Miss here.
Yeah, I mean, Troy has played very well against some pretty good teams. I mean, they should have had App State beaten. They were on the wrong end of a Hail Mary there. They did beat a pretty solid Marshall team. And Southern Miss has played a really soft schedule. It's kind of like going the Sun Belt's version of UNLV. So, yeah, I think Troy should be able to get a pretty good margin between themselves and the Golden Eagles. And also, I'm pretty sure that this is Southern Mississippi's first time playing Troy as members of the same conference. So, I mean, Troy should be pretty hyped for this game because it's kind of a legitimizing thing for how far the Sun Belt has come as an entity.
Yeah, for sure. Arkansas State, Dan, takes on JMU. Now, Arkansas State, one of the 5 remaining undefeated teams against the spread, taking on JMU, who is also undefeated against the spread. So that's kind of interesting too. JMU -11.5. Computer has them by over 14 against Arkansas State.
What James Madison is doing should probably be played over and over in the offices in Fargo, North Dakota, to get the place convinced that they need to go up to FBS as well. Because if the Dukes can do this, imagine what the Bison would be able to do.
Oh man, they could just destroy some of these teams, Dan. I think
Yeah, I mean, and Madison has long been an FCS power, and they're looking like I don't think they're eligible to win the Sun Belt Championship in their first year, but they're looking like they could run through most of this league. other than Coastal Carolina, I don't really see anyone in the Sun Belt taking this team down as long as they play to what they've created so far. So Arkansas State played fairly decently as far as the computer is concerned. Their numbers have been pretty close to what the computers expected. So, yeah, I think 2 touchdowns is probably about right here.
All right. Sounds good. Cool, Dan. Now let's get into our picks. Like we said on the week 1, episode 1, we'll give one pick that we like every single week. And between Dan and I, whoever has the most points or most correct at the end of the year will win some type of prize. So maybe just pride. We'll see what happens. But Dan, you had Army last week, -7.5. They lost outright.
Yeah, that was just so poor.
All right. And I got my first win. I took Arkansas State, and they got a nice win there. They covered 7.5. So Dan, we'll start with you. Looking for your first win. Who you got here?
Yeah, so I'm going to go into the MAC here, and I'm going to take Miami of Ohio against Kent State plus 5.5. So the Red Hawks have actually done very well in this series against the Golden Flashes. If you take Miami +6 over the past 7 years in this matchup, you would have covered all 7. And yeah, Miami, basically every matchup is either Kent State wins by 3 points or less, or Miami pulls one out. And they're at home this time. Kent State has not been a good road team. And the thing about the flash fast offense is the more that you see it, the easier it is to defend. So Miami sees Kent State every year. They're in the same division. They combined for a lot of points last year. I think it was 48-47, but Miami actually knows what it's doing against Kent State, and they're going to be able to score themselves. So I think the Red Hawks can do enough here to keep this game to a field goal or less. They might even win it, but I'm just going to take my free 5.5 points.
All right. Sounds good. I'm going to go to the ACC, Dan, and I'm going to take Duke. I'm going to take Duke -3.5 over Georgia Tech. Honestly, if Kansas wasn't, having the national spotlight, I think Duke could get it, right? Duke's looked very, very well this season. Georgia Tech, obviously coming off that win. But I think Duke's just more balanced offensively, a little more better defensively as well. And I think -3.5 is a little lower number considering Georgia Tech's coming off that win last week. So I'm gonna jump on the Blue Devils here, hope to get a win.
I think that's probably a pretty good play.
Yeah, for sure. So who's the Brent Key is the interim coach at Georgia Tech? Is that correct? I think.
I think so.
I think that's, yeah. So again, great win, coming off great win, but I think he's a former Georgia Tech player too, but I think Duke's just better. There's a better.
God, that's going to get so confusing when Virginia Tech plays Georgia Tech.
Oh, it's like, wait, what's going on here?
Yeah.
It's going to be super confusing. So, all right, there we go, Dan. Again, Dan Angel 11 on Twitter. You can find him. He writes a ton of blogs for us. www.kotasportscappers.com. He's been doing these ratings. Okay, hold on. Ratings, rankings. I think I always get them confused. What do you say ratings, right?
I tend to say ratings, but
okay.
you can call them either one. They're pretty interchangeable.
I was going to say, I think I've been going back and forth through the first 3 episodes. But anyways, Dan writes a lot of the stuff on the website. Check him out. Follow him on Twitter. And we'll see everybody next week. Dan, any last thoughts here?
Let's just hope I can finally get a win.
All right, Dan 0-2. Looking for that first win. We'll see everybody next week. Peace.